Looking for a heartwarming children's book with a powerful message?
Being Me is the Best Thing to Be by Judy Erb tells the story of Honey, a curious little turtle who learns that being herself is the very best thing to be. It's a wonderful read for children, parents, and grandparents celebrating self confidence and self acceptance.
You can purchase this book on BookBaby, Amazon, or Barnes& and Noble.
If you want an autographed copy, you can email Judy directly at jerbauthor@gmail.com with your mailing address and who you'd like it personalized to.
All of these links are in the show notes, but make sure you get your copy today. Welcome to the podcast. I'm William,
And I'm Kat,
and that makes this Info on the Go.
feeding your curiosity wherever you go.
So, picture yourself walking through a shallow pond or a slow-moving stream on a warm summer's day. The water feels good, you're enjoying yourself, and then suddenly you notice something moving on your leg. At first, you might think it's a piece of vegetation or maybe a small worm. Then you look closer and realize it's a leech,
Not a leech, you say.
not a leech.
Mm,
You know, I just want to say right here, it says on this thing for most people that discovery would end that day's swim. Yeah, it would be over for me too. I'd be gone, blank, done.
yes,
I might take the leech off and go fishing. I don't know.
for sure, for sure. Leeches have a reputation that is almost impossible to escape. They're slimy, they move in an unusual way, and some species attach themselves to animals and feed on blood. Ugh. They're creatures that many people would rather admire from a very safe distance. But there's much more to the story than that.
Yeah, because leeches have been part of human history for thousands of years. People have feared them, collected them, sold them, studied them, and perhaps most surprisingly, deliberately placed them on sick people as part of medical treatment. Now, that all sounds strange to us today. Why would anyone willingly put a blood feeding worm on their body?
Yeah, I don't know. The answer takes us into a very different world of medicine, a time when doctors had a very different idea about what caused illness and how the human body worked. But the history of the leech doesn't stop with ancient medicine.
After centuries of being used by physicians, leeches eventually fell out of favor as medicine became more scientific. You might think that would be the end of the medical story. Well, not so fast. Because the leech, well, it's eventually going to find its way back to modern medicine, but for a very different reason.
And that's what makes this animal so fascinating. The same creature that was once used because doctors believed removing blood could restore the body's balance would eventually be studied by modern scientists for the remarkable biological properties of its saliva.
Man, you just gave the episode away. Let's just end here. Mic drop. Let's walk away.
Well, this isn't simply a story about a creepy animal that drinks blood, okay?
Yeah, it's more about the evolution, the medicine, the science, and one of the strangest relationships humans have ever had with, another living creature that sucks blood other than vampires.
Do you believe in vampires?
No, I do not. Do you?
No.
But you know what? Our Halloween episode is coming up, so maybe I should say here, yeah, I believe in vampires as much as I do aliens.
Fair enough.
What exactly is a leech? You want to start that off?
For sure.
All right.
For sure. Well, a leech might look like a strange, slimy worm, and in a basic sense, that's exactly what it is. Leeches belong to a group of animals called annelids, which are segmented worms. That means they're relatives of earthworms. They may look very different from one another, but both belong to the same larger biological group.
Hmm. There are thousands of different species of leeches, and they don't all live the same way. This is important because when most people hear the word leech, they immediately picture a blood feeding animal attached to someone's leg. or other body part. But the blood feeding is only one lifestyle found among leeches. Some species are predators. Instead of feeding on blood, they hunt other small animals. Their prey can include worms, insect larvae, snails, and other small invertebrates. Other species have different feeding habits and occupy different places within their own ecosystems. Now, if the leech is eating on mosquito larvae, I say go for it. I'm
Yes.
team leech.
Yes. I will harvest them. They can live in the pond. Like, I don't care.
Yeah, team leech. T-shirt.
Yep, yep, yep. Many leeches live in freshwater environments, ponds, lakes, marshes, wetlands, and slow-moving streams that can provide the kinds of conditions they need. These environments offer moisture, shelter, and plenty of potential food. But leeches aren't restricted to water. Some leeches have adapted to life on land, especially in places where the environment stays damp. In humid forests and other moist habitats, terrestrial leeches can move through vegetation and leaf litter searching for food.
Their bodies are especially well studied to this lifestyle, because a typical leech has a long, flexible body made up of segments. Unlike earthworms, a leech has specialized suckers on its ends. And these suckers help it attach to surfaces and, move through its environment. The front sucker surrounds the mouth and can be especially important for species that feed on other animals or blood. The body itself is also remarkably flexible. A leech can stretch out, contract, and change its shape as it moves. Some species move by attaching one end of their body, stretching the other end forward, and then pulling the rest of the body along. That movement, well, it can look a lot like an exaggerated inchworm.
Mm.
Yeah, that sounds kind of interesting. I guess it would kind of like any kind of worm. Its head would go up, it would have that hump in the middle, then it would straighten out, kind of.
That flexibility becomes particularly important for blood feeding species. When one of these leeches feeds, its body can expand considerably. Instead of needing to find food constantly, it can take advantage of a successful feeding opportunity and carry a large meal inside its own body. But how does it even know that food is nearby? This is where the leech becomes much more interesting. A leech doesn't necessarily need to see a potential meal from a distance. It can detect changes in its environment. Depending on the species, leeches can respond to movement, vibrations, temperature, and chemical signals.
So imagine a leech sitting in a shallow water, and then something large moves nearby. The water begins to shift, vibrations travel through the environment, chemical signals appear, the temperature around the animal may change. To us, those changes might seem insignificant, but to a leech, they can be valuable information. For a blood feeding species, those signals may indicate that a potential host is nearby. And this is an important distinction. The leech isn't nearly hunting humans per se. It's responding to environmental clues that may tell it that an animal is nearby and a potential food source.
From the leech's perspective, a person walking through the water isn't a horror story, it's an opportunity. Of course, that doesn't make the experience any more pleasant for the person involved at all.
No.
But it does help explain why leeches have been so successful. Their bodies, senses, and feeding strategies have evolved to work together. Some leeches hunt, some feed on other invertebrates, some live in water, and some live on land. And some have developed an especially effective way of getting nutrients from larger animals.
That variety is important because it means we shouldn't think of the leech as a single type of animal with one behavior. They're a diverse group with different lifestyles. Now that we know what a leech actually is, I say let's take a look at that biology. The specialized blood feeding species and the incredible way it gets its meal. What do you think?
Absolutely. One of the most important features is the sucker. Most leeches have suckers at both ends of their bodies. The rear sucker can act as an anchor, helping the animal hold onto a surface while it moves or feeds, and the front sucker surrounds the mouth, which is especially important when the leech attaches to a host. Once attached, the leech has to get through the skin. Different species have different methods. Some blood feeding leeches have jaws lined with tiny teeth, and these jaws can make small incisions in the skin. Other species use a specialized structure called a proboscis, which works more like a tiny piercing tube.
I don't want the teeth leech.
I don't want either one of them.
I don't need, if I had to choose, it would definitely be not the jaws because I would just think of the movie Jaws and a big leech coming at me going, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
So the wound is usually small, but the important part isn't necessarily the size of the wound, it's what the leech puts into it. The leech's saliva contains substances that help it feed. One of the most famous is hirtin, and it's an anti-clotting agent that interferes with the body's normal clotting process. Think about what normally happens when you get a cut. Your body immediately tries to stop the bleeding, platelets move toward the injury, and a series of chemical reactions eventually produce a clot. That's exactly what the leech doesn't want to happen.
Now, if the blood quickly clotted around its feeding site, the leech's meal would be over. So the leech has evolved a chemical solution. Hirudin interferes with thrombin, a protein that plays an important role in blood clotting, which, by interfering with its processes, the leech can help keep blood flowing while it feeds. This is one of the most remarkable things about the animal. It simply isn't taking blood. It has evolved a way to temporarily interfere with one of the body's most important defenses against blood loss.
This also helps explain why a feeding site can continue to bleed, after the leech has detached itself. The animal may have already been gone, but the substance from its saliva, well, it continues affecting the clotting process. And then there's the leech's ability to handle the meal itself. A blood feeding leech may be relatively thin before feeding, but its body can expand substantially as it takes in blood. That's important because a blood meal isn't something the animal can count on finding every day. So when the opportunity comes, it needs to make the most of it.
Its digestive system is adapted to handle its unusual feeding strategy. Instead of immediately processing everything at once, the leech can digest its meal slowly. This allows some species to survive for surprisingly long periods between meals. Imagine being an animal that doesn't know when its next meal is coming. You might spend days or weeks waiting for the right opportunity. Then an animal finally passes close enough for you to feed.
And you don't want to waste that opportunity, so the leech's entire body works together. The sucker provides the attachment, the mouth parts create the opening, the saliva helps prevent the clotting, the expandable body accommodates the meal, and the digestive system processes that meal over time. What looks like a simple worm is actually a highly specialized feeding system. Go Mother Nature.
Right.
And that leads to a very important question. How does the entire process actually happen? How does a leech go from simply sitting in its environment to successfully finding a host, attaching itself, feeding, and eventually saying, see ya?
Kind of like a mosquito, but not.
Well, a mosquito could just fly away.
Oof.
I guess we're going to have to do an episode on mosquitoes. I hate mosquitoes.
Me too.
They should be eradicated.
Indeed. I've tried to find what's good about them. Maybe we can find a good thing about them or something. Maybe hate them less. Anyway, imagine a blood feeding leech resting in a pond. It isn't necessarily chasing anything. Instead, it's just waiting for the environment to tell it that a potential meal is nearby. The first step is finding a host. And as we discussed earlier, leeches can detect changes in their surroundings. Movement and vibrations can provide clues. Chemical signals can also be important. Depending on the species, temperature, and other environmental changes may help the leech recognize that an animal is nearby.
So, a person walking through that shallow water can create plenty of these signals. The person's leg, it disturbs the water. The bottom of the pond may be stirred up and vibrations travel through the surrounding environment. That sends all those signals to, well, the leech. To a leech, they can find a meal. And once the leech gets close enough to its potential host, it needs to attach itself. And this is where those suckers, they become useful.
The leech grips the surface of the host and establishes a secure connection. Remember, the host isn't going to cooperate. It may be walking, swimming, or moving through vegetation. The leech needs to remain attached while everything around it is moving. Once it has secured its position, the leech begins feeding. Depending on the species, it may use its jaws and tiny teeth to create an incision, or it may use its proboscis to pierce the skin.
The opening doesn't have to be, large. The leech's real challenge is just keeping the blood flowing. And that's where that saliva becomes so important. As the leech feeds, it releases that anti-clotting Hiriden. And that's just one of the best known examples. These substances, they interfere with the body's ability to form that clot while they're feeding. So without that, the body's natural defense would quickly begin closing the wound.
Instead, the blood continues to flow. The leech begins taking in the blood, and its body starts to expand. And that brings up one of the most common depictions of the leech. We call it a bloodsucker, but it doesn't really suck blood like a person drinking through a straw. Not exactly. The word is useful as a simple description, but the actual feeding process is more complicated. The leech's mouth parts, muscular movements, and the flow of blood from the wound all contribute to moving the blood into its digestive system.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Technology is everywhere, but sometimes you want someone to explain what the heck is going on. And that's where Fresh from Cash comes in. Created by IT professional Joel Faulkner, Fresh from Cash delivers tech news, how-tos, and straightforward explainers for everyday technology users. No confusing jargon, no assumption that you already know how everything works, just practical information that actually makes sense. Wondering what a passkey is? Why your computer suddenly feels slow? How to spot phishing emails or whether you really need backups? Fresh from Cash breaks it all down in plain English. And every Tuesday, you can get the latest tech tips and insights delivered directly to your inbox, completely free.
So, if technology sometimes feels like it should have come with a better manual, check out Fresh from Cash. Fresh from Cash, tech news that makes sense. Find that link in the show notes.
So it's not simply attaching itself and using a tiny straw. It's using a highly specialized feeding system that evolution has redefined over a very long period of time. So when the leech has had enough, once it's obtained its meal and needs to detach, it's got to get away. Its body is much larger and can spend a considerable amount of time digesting the meal before it really needs to feed again. So the entire process can be summarized pretty simple.
Find the host, attach, create a small wound, prevent clotting, feed, detach. But underneath that simple sequence is an extraordinary amount of biological specialization. The leech has to locate an animal without necessarily seeing it clearly. It has to attach securely. It has to get through the skin. It has to improve the body's clotting response. It has to consume enough blood to make the effort worthwhile. And then it has to store and digest that meal.
What seems like a simple feeding behavior is actually a carefully coordinated biological process. And this is one of the reasons scientists have found leeches so interesting. It's their ability to control blood flow. It isn't just useful to the leech, it's useful to humans too. But before we get into the modern connection, I said let's go back in time and find out about the ancient leech.
Ancient leeches.
Okay, hang on. How about this? No, no, no. I don't like the way I set that up.
We have legendary leeches here.
Legend. But before we really get into the modern connection of leeches, I say let's go back in time and find out how ancient medicine used leeches. What do you think?
Absolutely.
But before we do that, Coke.
Pepsi.
Definitely not getting anything with a straw right now.
No. So now that we're back, to understand why humans deliberately used leeches as medicine, we have to go back thousands of years to a time when doctors had a very different idea about what caused illness. People could see that the human body sometimes became sick, developed fevers, swelled, weakened, or behaved in ways that were difficult to explain. But they didn't have microscopes, modern laboratory tests, or an understanding of bacteria and viruses. They had to make sense of illness using what they could observe.
One of the most influential ideas in ancient medicine was that health depended on balance within the body. This eventually became known as humoral theory. In the system associated with Greek medicine, the body was believed to contain four major fluids, or humors, I guess. You got blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. So, according to this theory, a person was healthy when these substances were in the proper balance. If one became excessive or, deficient, illness, well, could be the result.
From our modern perspective, the theory is incorrect, but it gave physicians a framework for trying to understand disease. If a patient had certain symptoms, doctors could interpret those symptoms as evidence that something inside the body was out of balance. And if too much blood was believed to be part of the problem, removing some of it seemed to be like a reasonable solution. This led to the widespread practice of bloodletting.
So, blood could be removed in several ways. A physician might make an incision in a vein, use a instrument, or eventually apply leeches. Leeches had an advantage because they could remove blood gradually and could be placed directly on a particular area of the body.
The use of bloodletting became deeply connected to ancient and later medical traditions. Greek physicians developed and documented many of these ideas, and Roman medicine inherited and expanded on them. The physician Galen became particularly influential. His writings about anatomy and medicine shaped medical thinking for centuries, and his ideas about bloodletting continued to influence physicians long after his death.
Leeches were useful within this system because they didn't require a physician to make a large incision. A leech could attach itself to the skin and slowly take a blood meal. Its saliva also contained substances that interfered with the clotting, allowing the blood to continue flowing while the animal fed.
That could make leeches especially appealing when a physician wanted to remove blood from a specific location. If a patient had swelling or inflammation, a doctor might believe that applying leeches to that area could help restore balance. Of course, today we understand that most of the conditions historically treated with bloodletting are not caused by an excess of blood or an imbalance of the four humors. But it's important to understand the historical context. Ancient physicians weren't working with information modern medicine has today. They were observing symptoms, trying treatments, recording what happened, and building theories from those observations.
And the problem was that a theory could become deeply established even when it isn't actually correct. Once generations of physicians accept bloodletting as legitimate medicine, it became difficult to challenge. If a patient improved after treatment, that could be interpreted as evidence that the treatment had worked. If the patient didn't improve, well, there were many other possibilities for explanations. And this would eventually turn the leech into much more than an animal found in ponds. It would turn it into a major part of the medical economy.
By the 17 and 1800s, medicinal leeches had become an important part of European medicine. Bloodletting was still widely practiced, and leeches were considered useful tools for removing blood. What had once been a creature found in ponds and wetlands had become a valuable medical commodity.
Physicians used leeches for a remarkable variety of complaints. They were applied for conditions involving swelling and inflammation. They were applied for headaches, fevers, illnesses that doctors believed could be connected to an excess or an imbalance of blood. Man, could you imagine going to the doctor and being like, I've got a migraine. Oh, you need a leech.
Mm-hmm. That that sounds sketchy.
Barry?
The important thing to remember is that physicians of the time weren't necessarily using leeches because they thought they were magical creatures. They believed the treatment fit the medical theories they had inherited. If the body was thought to contain an excess of blood, then removing some of it made sense within that system.
But all of this, it made the demand for leeches become enormous. France became particularly associated with the medical leech trade. Huge numbers of leeches were collected and imported to supply doctors and medical institutions. The demand became so great that the natural populations in some areas were placed under considerable pressure.
This created a strange new occupation, the leech collector. Imagine making your living by searching ponds, marshes, and wetlands for leeches. It wasn't glamorous work. Collectors had to enter wet environments, find the animals, gather them, and keep them alive until they could be sold.
One method involved using animals such as horses to attract leeches. A horse could be led to shallow water where leeches would attach themselves. Collectors could then go gather the animals, remove them for transport, and sell. It sounds unpleasant, but at the time, this was really a legitimate business.
Leeches had become valuable enough to support an entire commercial system. They had to be collected, transported, stored, and eventually delivered to physicians. In other words, there was a medical supply chain built around a small aquatic worm, and doctors could use a surprising number of them.
A patient might be treated with several leeches depending on the condition and the physician's judgment. But this growing popularity also revealed one of the major problems with bloodletting. It was often used far beyond situations where it could be realistically helping. So the underlying theory was completely wrong.
A patient who was already weak or seriously ill could potentially become even weaker after losing blood. Repeated bloodletting could contribute to significant blood loss and anemia. Instead of helping the patient recover, the treatment could sometimes make the situation worse. And there was another problem that's common throughout the history of medicine. Treatments can appear to work even when they don't.
Placebo.
Right.
We're going to do one on that because we're going to debunk some stuff in that. If someone felt better after being treated with leeches, the improvement might be credited to the leech, but the person might have improved naturally, or another part of the treatment may have been responsible. Without modern clinical trials and controlled comparisons, it was extremely difficult to know because you heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend.
Right.
You don't know the song?
No,
That joke was really lost on you.
I'm sorry.
It's fine. One of our listeners writes in and is like, William, you nailed that.
Oh.
Heard it from a friend too. Anyway,
The popularity of leech therapy, therefore, tells us something important about medical history. A treatment doesn't necessarily become popular because it has been scientifically proven. Sometimes it becomes popular because it fits the accepted explanation of disease and because generations of physicians believe in it. Eventually, however, that began to change.
oh yeah, because during the 19th century, medicine was starting to develop a much better understanding of anatomy, physiology, circulation, and disease. Scientists were beginning to challenge the older medical theories, and physicians, increasingly, began asking a much more important question. Does this treatment actually work?
As the evidence against routine bloodletting grew, the medical demand for leeches began to decline. The creature that had once been one of medicine's most valuable tools was slowly becoming a symbol of an older era of treatment. But the story wasn't over. The leech was about to disappear from mainstream medicine and then, years later, make one of the most unexpected comebacks in medical history.
What?
Yes.
So by the 19th century, medicine was beginning to change in ways that would eventually bring the long history of routine bloodletting to an end. One important change was a better understanding of anatomy and circulation. Scientists were learning how the heart worked and pumped blood through the arteries and the veins. The body was no longer being viewed simply as a collection of fluids that needed to be kept in balance. Researchers were beginning to understand that different organs and systems, they had unique functions and systems worked together in complicated ways.
Then came one of the biggest changes in medical history, the development of germ theory. Scientists such as Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch, how do
Coach. Let's say Koch. Koch. Let's go with Koch.
okay, helped establish that microorganisms could cause disease. This was revolutionary. For centuries, illnesses had often been explained through ideas such as imbalances in the body. Now, physicians had a completely different way to think about infection and disease. The question was becoming less about how do you restore our body's balance and more about what is actually causing the illness.
That change in thinking had enormous consequences for bloodletting, because as doctors began examining traditional treatments more critically, they found that removing blood, it didn't actually treat the underlying cause of most diseases that it had been prescribed for. In fact, a patient with an infection, they didn't have an excess amount of blood that needed to be removed. A fever wasn't necessarily caused by too much blood, and a person who was already weak, well, they could potentially be harmed by losing even more blood.
Scientific testing also began changing the way doctors thought about treatments. Instead of accepting a treatment simply because it had been used for generations, physicians increasingly wanted evidence that actually worked. And bloodletting gradually lost its place as a routine treatment. And when bloodletting declined, the demand for medical leeches declined with it.
So, for centuries, the leech had been associated with medicine. Now, increasingly, it was becoming associated with an older period when doctors had explanations for diseases that modern science, well, was rejecting. The change wasn't immediate because old medical traditions didn't just disappear overnight. Physicians continued using bloodletting in some places even as newer ideas were developing. But the overall direction was clear. Medicine was moving toward a more scientific understanding of the body.
The leech appeared to be on its way out. And this is where the story could have ended. A creature that had been used by physicians for thousands of years had finally been replaced by newer medical knowledge. But there was something about the leech that modern medicine had completely forgotten: its saliva. And scientists were beginning to understand what chemicals in leech saliva could help interfere with blood clotting. And that discovery would eventually become much more important than the old idea of simply removing blood.
So, the return of the leech to medicine is one of the strangest twists in this entire story. Modern doctors didn't bring leeches back because they suddenly decided that ancient bloodletting had been correct all along. In fact, they brought the leech back because modern surgery created a very unique problem. And the leech just happened to have a natural solution.
To understand that problem, we need to look at reconstructive and microsurgery. Modern surgeons can sometimes reconnect extremely small blood vessels, and this has made it possible to perform remarkable procedures, including repairing damaged tissue, transferring tissue from one part of the body to the other, and in some cases, reattaching severed body parts.
So, for tissue to survive, however, blood has to move through it properly. An artery brings blood into the tissue, veins carry blood back out. Ideally, both systems work together. Fresh blood arrives through the artery, delivers oxygen and nutrients, and then leaves through the veins. But sometimes the arterial connection works better than the venous connection.
Blood can get into the tissue, but it can't drain away effectively. When that happens, blood begins to accumulate. The tissue becomes swollen and congested, pressure can increase, and circulation can become impaired. If that problem isn't corrected, the tissue can eventually suffer serious damage. And this is where the leech can become useful. A medical leech can attach to the congested tissue and remove a small amount of blood. But the important part isn't simply the blood the animal consumes, it's what happens at the bite site.
Yeah, because remember Hirden, that anti-blood clotting stuff that's in the leech's saliva? Well, as the leech feeds, it helps keep blood flowing from that area. This can temporarily relieve venous congestion and give the body circulation time to recover. In simple terms, the leech can provide a temporary way for blood to leave the tissue when the normal venous change system isn't really working good enough. In other words, they're the stoplight at a busy intersection, but at that busy intersection, it's green. How was that?
Yes.
Okay.
This can be particularly useful in certain reconstructive procedures involving tissue flaps, grafts, and reattached body parts. Imagine a surgeon had successfully reconnected the tiny blood vessels in a damaged finger. Blood begins flowing into the finger through an artery, but the veins aren't drawing the blood properly. The finger can become swollen and congested. A medical leech may be used in carefully selected circumstances to help remove some of that excess blood and help keep blood flowing at the site.
So that same basic principle can apply to certain tissue flaps used in reconstructive surgery. Surgeons may move tissue to another part of the body to repair an injury or reconstruct an area. That tissue needs a healthy blood supply to survive. If blood enters the tissue but cannot drain properly, the tissue can be at risk. So the leech doesn't magically repair the veins, it doesn't replace surgery. Instead, the leech it provides temporary assistance while the body circulation and the repaired blood vessels recover. And that's what makes the story so ironic.
For centuries, physicians used leeches because they believed removing blood could restore the body's balance. Modern medicine rejected that explanation. But centuries later, modern surgeons discovered that the animal's ability to remove blood and prevent clotting could actually be useful in a very specific situation. The old medical theory was wrong. The biology was real. There's an important distinction.
Modern medical leech therapy isn't simply a return to ancient medicine. It's just based on the understanding exactly what the animal does and applying that biology, to controlled medical settings. So today's medical leeches aren't simply taken from a random pond. Leeches used for medical purposes, they're specially they're specially supplied and their use is carefully managed by healthcare professionals.
So, a creature that was once a symbol of outdated medicine became part of some remarkably advanced surgical procedures. A worm that evolved millions of years ago developed a natural chemical system for controlling blood flow. Humans spent centuries using that ability without understanding it. Then modern science finally figured out what was happening. And in one of the strangest twists in medical history, the leech found its way back into the operating room. Not because ancient medicine had been completely right, but because modern science finally understood the part that actually was.
Coke.
Pepsi.
Hirden.
I don't really need any anticoagulants. We'll be right back.
So the return of the leech to medicine has led scientists to take a much closer look at what.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Ready to turn an ordinary day into an unforgettable adventure? Check out QR Hunter. It lets you create custom treasure hunts with reusable QR code tiles. You can personalize clues, puzzles, photo challenges. You can do it all in just a few minutes. It's perfect for birthday parties, family game nights, classrooms, parks, team building events, or if you just want to have family fun. The free QR Hunter app, it works with any smart device. The adventure, it never really ends. You can search for QR Hunter on Amazon, or you can simply click the link in the show notes. But let the adventure start today. Was happening inside the animal saliva. For centuries, people had observed that a leech could feed on blood without the blood immediately clotting. But modern science finally gave researchers the tools to understand why. One of the most important discoveries was Hirden, a powerful anti clotting product that was created by the leeches. So, when you think about leeches, most of us picture a blood feeding animal attached to a person's leg, responded because they were in the pool waiting around. Some leeches are predators rather than blood feeders. Instead of attaching themselves to animals, they hunt smaller creatures, like we talked about. So if you find a leech in a pond, it may have absolutely no interest in you.
Leeches are also part of the food web themselves. Fish, birds, amphibians, and other animals can feed on them. That means leeches aren't simply creatures that take from an ecosystem. They're also food for other organisms and contribute to the movement of energy through their environment. Their role can vary depending on the species and habitat.
So let's get into some of the myths, fears, and a little bit of fun facts here. We learned that, we talked about leeches are much more complicated than the slimy little bloodsuckers that most of us imagine when we hear the word leech. The first myth is one we've already touched on. Every leech wants to drink your blood. That simply isn't true. There are thousands of species of leeches that have very different diets. Some are predators and they eat worms, insects, and other creatures. Others feed on blood. But even among those species, humans aren't necessarily a preferred host. So seeing a leech doesn't automatically mean you found a tiny vampire looking for you.
Another common idea is that the leech can live forever after one meal. They can certainly go a surprisingly long time between meals, especially some blood feeding species. But that's because a large blood meal provides a substantial amount of nutrition, and their digestive systems are designed to process that meal slowly. But survive forever is obviously an exaggeration. Leeches still need energy. They still have to deal with predators and environmental conditions, and eventually they need another source of food.
Then there's the old advice about using salt. Salt was traditionally used to make leeches detach, and there's a reason this became such a popular idea. Salt can draw water out of the leech's tissues and cause it to react strongly. But that doesn't mean it's a good idea to experiment with salt on or other, things if a leech is attached to you. Trying to forcefully remove a leech that has attached itself to you, it can be a problem, especially because the leech's mouth parts can remain firmly attached. And because it's saliva, it affects blood clotting. If a leech is attached and there is concern about the wound, the safest approach is to seek appropriate medical advice rather than just trying to do the old remedies and yanking that sucker off. It might take more with it than what you bargained for.
So, and here's another interesting piece of language history. The word leech became associated with physicians because of the animal's long history in medicine. Eventually, the word took on another meaning: a person who takes advantage of someone else or constantly takes without giving anything back. So, when someone is called a leech, they're being compared to the animal's reputation for attaching itself to a host and taking nourishment.
So, why do we find leeches so disgusting? There's something about leeches that seems to trigger an immediate reaction in many people. You can show someone a picture of a beautiful bird or a colorful fish, and they'll probably think, oh, that's interesting. But if you show them a picture of a leech attached to someone's skin, suddenly you find people looking away. But why?
Part of the answer may be that humans are naturally sensitive to things associated with parasites and blood. Albeit granted. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, parasites, blood. Yeah.
Right. So, throughout our evolutionary history, organisms that live on or inside other animals could carry risks. Ticks, fleas, mosquitoes, and other parasites can transmit diseases. So, humans developed strong reactions to things crawling on our skin or feeding from our bodies.
And that's really the gist of why we find leeches disgusting. Anyway, leeches. So the next time you see a leech, go fishing with it. Don't let it suck on your blood.
Oof.
The fascinating leech. It's an example of being used in ancient times. We about drove it to extinction, farmed it for a little while, then got rid of it, then brought it back. The amazing leech.
Yay. Woo.
Yeah.
If you would like to support this podcast, tell a friend and help get the word out.
If you would like to support the show, you can do so at Patreon or take advantage of our sponsors. Either way it goes, those links are in the show notes.
And as always, William and I want to thank you for listening.
Whether you're just tuning in or been with us from day one, a big thank you.
Join the Facebook group and info on the go.
Over there, you can get to know us or just ask us a question.
But follow us wherever you get your podcast.
Send us some of that fan mail using the link in the show notes, or we would prefer you to leave a review too.
And leaving that review, it really does help others find us. You can also email us directly at
infoonthegopodcast@gmail.com. And all of this is in the show notes. Till next time.
Stay Curious. I
All
don't
right.
know, where did I mess up? Did I?
I don't know. I think I jumped over you and we've done it so much now. It's just like, okay.
I mean, it doesn't matter. No, I'm just like really, I confused myself doing that.
uh, Leeches. Yeah, that was pretty cool. I could
Yeah.
see them being small, kind of like a mosquito that bubbles up after they suck your blood. But I think it's cool that leeches eat mosquito larvae.
Yes. Yes. I thought it was kind of neat to know that they have like either a mouth with tiny teeth or a proboscis.
It's kind of gross either way.
I mean, yeah, but they're helpful.
To those who lost limbs, ligaments, and whatever else.
Skin grafts, all that good stuff.
Yeah. Hey, listeners, ready to transform your sleep? Cozy Earth is all about lasting luxury and comfort. Their bamboo sheets have been called the world's softest sheets, cooling, moisture wicking, and unbelievably soft. And I can tell you they get better with every wash. And they have a 100-night sleep trial and a 10-year warranty.
But it doesn't stop there. They have bath, sleepwear, loungewears, and even skincare. Free shipping on orders of $50 or more.
Make sure you go to cozyearth.com, use our code INFOGO at checkout to save 21% off. You can find all of this in the show notes.